Hey guys, welcome back. This is the story about what if Naruto was a hollow. Before we start, please subscribe to the channel and like the video as well, it really means a lot. So let's start the what if. Know about it? Drindo asked, raising an eyebrow to Naruto's question. Todoroki was my younger brother, and he had possession of that book. He even added his own notes to it, about how he could counter my attacks, among other things. How could I possibly not know about it, eh? Naruto glared at the king in response to that, as he rose to his feet and averted his gaze before dropping into his usual stance. The fight wasn't going to go in his favor if Drindo kept using those abilities of his. What the fuck, man? I fight my way over here just to notice you getting your ass kicked hard by this fucker. What makes you think I'm gonna follow such a useless king after this display? Came a rude, taunting voice. Naruto turned and glared even more murderously at the taunting voice, only to find Naruto fighting his way through the end of the thicket of battling hollows. He didn't seem to care that he harmed former slaves or hollows in his army. Not that Naruto himself cared regardless. But the Fox Hollow really wasn't in the mood to put up with this shit, so a quick release of his superior Ryatsu made the Mantis Hollow shut his mouth in a second. The three hollows in the vicinity stood in awkward silence, until it was broken by a fourth presence making itself known to the group. Grimmjow, like Naruto, had fought his way through the crowd of hollows to make it here, though he was being uncharacteristically silent. Well. Isn't this funny? The king, who seemed to boast so big before, is now being backed up by two other hollows in a 3-on-1 fight. How ironic. But I guess it just can't be helped. After all, I am a Vasto Lorde, and you all are a bunch of lowly Ajuchas. It makes sense that he was cut off by a blue zero that he avoided somewhat clumsily. If a zero to the head is what it takes to make you shut up, I'm going to hate killin' your ass, said the grumpy Panther Hollow, who was clearly the one who fired off the attack. Drindo was about to say something insulting back towards the Hollow, but they were all interrupted by sound of flapping wings. They looked overhead, and noticed Ulquiorra also flying in from over the waves of hollows, to land gracefully at a spot in between Naruto and Grimmjow. The Bat Hollow didn't say a word, but he looked at Naruto with a condescending glare, like he didn't approve of Naruto's little display of insults to Naruto. Naruto sneered and almost pouted, knowing that Ulquiorra was very much more powerful than he was. Oh, now, come on, guys. This just isn't fair to me. Now you've got that damnable Bat Hollow joining the battle. Isn't there any way you can spare me someone to fight for me? Drindo said childishly. He was only met with glares. Guess not. Looks like I'll just have to make do with what I have. Even against 4 high-level Ajuchas, my abilities should be more than enough to finish the job, he whispered to himself. With those words in mind, Drindo sped off, leaving his 4 opponents on guard. The king appeared right next to Naruto first, considering him the weakest target, due to the fact that he was slow and his incredible defense could be breached by him. What are you doing, you ass? Roared Grimmjow, as he noticed Naruto was going to fail to stop Drindo's attack. Ulquiorra, sensing the Mantis Hollow's failure, using a surprising boost of speed to propel Naruto out of the way of Drindo's attack. Naruto went skidding through the dirt, grunting and cursing as he ultimately was out of harm's way. Drindo followed through with his explosive punch anyway, managing to nick Ulquiorra on his right wing. Despite just barely tapping it, the explosion was enough to almost completely obliterate the wing, leaving only a foot of torn leathery material growing out of Ulquiorra's backside. Naruto sat there rigidly, feeling somewhat numbed from the fact that he was saved by the Bat Hollow. He looked up to see the bat's wing already repairing itself via high-speed regeneration. The lack of feeling that Naruto quickly turned to anger and seething hate, as the Bat Hollow turned to the Mantis and gave him a look of pure disdain and contempt. If you're just going to get in the way like that, then why don't you go somewhere else where you can actually make yourself useful to someone? The Bat Hollow said acidly, much to the ire of Naruto. It was like Naruto's inferiority complex took a major blow right where it hurt, and one could actually hear Naruto hissing out in hate that was directed at Ulquiorra. "You bastard!" he hissed. It was barely audible, but the weight it seemed to carry was far greater than anything yelling ever could. While Neutra openly hated Grimjow with a burning passion, he couldn't say the same towards this bat hollow. Until now, that is. He just seemed a little emo, a little faggy for Neutra, but he always stayed out of his way. And, now that there was a damned woman of all things getting a position of power equal to him, he hated all three of his comrades. What the hell was Naruto thinking, appointing these guys that rank? Ulquiorra wasn't fazed at all by the hate directed at him, instead just opting to attack Drindo. Neutra then got to his feet, seeing how despite being attacked by Grimjow, Ulquiorra, and Naruto, he wasn't being fazed in the slightest. In fact, he was fighting fluidly, dodging every single strike with perfect ease. He also seemed to be patiently waiting for the right moment to attack. The time when Drindo had had enough was when Naruto attempted to slit his throat after Grimjow had given him a suitable opening. Drindo, like any Vasto Lorde, wasn't about to fall for such a simple trick. He purposely slid back to avoid the attack, and then let 3 pellets fall from the tubes on his head before using Sonido to disappear. "Get away from it!" Naruto roared, as time seemed to freeze as the glowing red pellets fell to the ground. Without any hesitation, Naruto used his weight to buck Ulquiorra and Grimjow out of the way, before taking cover himself. The pellets exploded in a fairly small explosion that Naruto had expected, one that wouldn't have been able to do more than seriously injure them should they be caught in it. The purpose of the attack became clear to Naruto after that. Drindo hadn't used that attack to kill. Rather, he simply used it as a distraction and as a chance to regroup and go on the offensive. The Vasto Lorde was simply toying with them. "You guys, if we're just going to get in each other's way, you shouldn't be here. Our advantage in numbers is useless if we don't know how to properly work as a team, which we don't. Go back to your solo battles, and don't regard me in the slightest. Just destroy the enemy," he shouted at the 3 others, before Drindo could attack. Then, Naruto heard a whooshing noise that he noticed was heading towards Neutra. "Oh, shit," he thought in his mind. It seemed that Drindo was determined to wipe out the least dangerous to him first, proven by how he seemed to always attack Neutra when he could go for any one of them. He had to do something if he wanted to save his second general. Without even thinking, Naruto himself sped over to Neutra's position, who didn't seem to notice that we was under attack. Roughly, Naruto shot one of his hind legs out, and kicked Neutra with all the force he could muster. The Mantis Hollow went flying back into the battlefield 100 feet away, but Drindo was still coming. The swipe meant for Neutra would have taken off his head and made it explode, but Naruto was apparently very good at reacting reflexively. He fell to one of his front paws, dodging underneath the first blow, before he used his momentum to propel himself away from the explosive kick that Drindo tried to combo him with. Unfortunately for him, the explosion was large enough to catch him while he was dodging, and the Ryatsu seared one of his legs until he was roaring in pain. He fell to the dirt with a thud, looking at his now useless back left leg. The Fox Hollow attempted to stand, but while he got 3 of his legs up, the injured one was just too painful for it to move. He couldn't even force himself through the pain to stand. His leg was shot for the time being. Ulquiorra and Grimjow, seeing that Neutra had flown somewhere else and Naruto was incapacitated, realized that their odds of winning took a dramatic drop. And, that was basically true for them. Drindo had clearly had enough of fooling around with them now that his main target was incapacitated, so he decided to stop holding back so much. Using the power of levitation sought out by hollows, he appeared next to Ulquiorra at a speed faster than he had ever shown, and slammed the bat hollow to the ground with a crashing explosive pound. The explosion lit up the night sky in a brilliant display of red and orange, and made anyone who hasn't fled a safe distance already do so. Needless to say, the impact and explosion almost killed Ulquiorra. In fact, it would have killed Ulquiorra if it wasn't for his amazing high-speed regeneration. Luckily, none of his internal organs had been ruptured, but he had lost both of his wings, legs, and one of his arms from the impact. At the very least, this would take a while to recover from. When Ulquiorra impacted, he wouldn't have bothered to get up even if he could. He had been defeated, and unless Grimjow could perform a miracle and defeat Drindo, then he would be killed here. So, the Bat Hollow just lay there face first in the dirt, waiting for either the release of death or the defeat of Drindo. And, while Ulquiorra lay there in his own personal crater, Grimjow stood undauntedly across from Drindo, never backing down from any sort of fear, though he already knew that he wasn't going to win. Off in the distance, around half a mile away, a lone two-legged figure watched the battle unfold. He breathed in the powerful Ryatsu, and knew at once that he would have to intervene. He stood on a very tiny mesa that barely rose 10 feet off of the landscape, and his expression didn't belay any sort of emotion. Looks like my fears were correct. I was hoping that when I told him that information, Drindo wouldn't set his sights on his kingdom. But, I was too naive, hoping that the conflict between brothers would have been resolved by now, and Torobik would have moved on. At the very least though, it looks like Torobik is no longer a part of this situation, though whether he's dead or not, I don't know. Still, Naruto is no match for Drindo at all, so I have to hurry. The figure said. Valakav Almazan had wandered into these parts once he heard word of a new kingdom sprouting onto this landscape. He was told from a passing hollow that the kingdom had been destroyed by Drindo in its early stages, but its king apparently hadn't been at the scene when it had occurred. He hopped off the rock and stopped his ramblings when he saw an explosion erupt onto the battlefield. He broke out into a run, hoping he would arrive there before Drindo prevailed. He was much closer to the battlefield when he saw another explosion burst onto the scene, this time in midair. He watched as a bat-like hollow plummeted to the ground, clearly dead or severely injured from that blast. Drindo was in sight now, clearly the one who had caused that last attack. He seemed to be standing over a fallen panther hollow, who was barely alive and able to move. The panther shook for a moment before it collapsed, clearly defeated by the superior hollow. All that time, Drindo stood over them smugly, not a scratch across his body. It was when he noticed Naruto on the ground that Drindo began walking towards the three downed hollow. He looked upon them like he was some kind of malevolent god, before he walked up to the panther hollow first, raising his foot over his head to crush his skull. The horned hollow broke into his fastest sonido, before appearing in front of a surprised Drindo. Before the red hollow could bring his foot down on Grimjow, Valakav grasped Drindo's leg, hoisting the other hollow into the air and flinging him elsewhere. Drindo managed to land on his feet, though he still slid away almost 50 feet. He glared at the new arrival with pure hate, which even deepened when he noticed who the arrival was. Valakav. He hissed, as he stared down the other hollow. Valakav stood his ground, before he turned back to view his descendant on the ground in a pitiful state. The two locked eyes with nothing but blank expressions, like either of them knew what to say. It was Naruto who finally broke the silence. Valakav, what are you doing here? He asked, wincing as he tried and failed to get to his feet again. The old hollow turned away from the much younger one, seeing Drindo stalk his way up to them. I decided to travel here after I had learned that some fresh new hollow had managed to start up a kingdom in a place I recommended him to. However, I see you've managed to make Drindo your enemy, so I'm here to step. Just sit there quietly and let me do all the work. He trailed off. Naruto looked like he was about to protest, but he lay his head down low in defeat, finding that there was nothing he could in the situation regardless, before he fell unconscious. Drindo had finally done it. Well, he shouldn't say, finally, as that implies that realistically he wouldn't be able to do this in the first place. He knew that this Fox Hollow was no match for him, as a king and as a fighter. But, he couldn't help but feel happy as both him and the Bat Hollow lay defeated and at his mercy. They would both die here today, along with the annoying Panther Hollow that he had just defeated. He would finish off the Panther Hollow first, him being the least of his worries and the one he didn't want to take revenge on. He walked up to them while grinning evilly the whole way, and raised his foot in preparation to finish the dirty deed. However, just as he was about to bring his foot down in the most audacious display of overkill ever, his explosive kick was blocked by an outsider of all things. He felt his leg get lifted into the air, before he was thrown back away from his prey, skidding and taking a look upon the newest interloper. He hissed when he saw the disfigured hollow. Gray skin, a horned mask, and a necklace of 6 bones that hung around his neck. Not to mention the buboes that coated his entire body. Valakav. He hissed, recognizing the familiar hollow immediately. He hadn't changed one bit since their last encounter, and that wasn't since, never mind. He had never had a good relationship with that one anyway. He noticed that Valakav was putting distance between them and the downed hollows, making it clear that he wanted to keep them from dying for some reason that Drindo couldn't fathom. Valakav was being his usual silent self, though he was glaring at Drindo like he had committed some kind of mortal sin. Drindo walked up to him, closing the distance between them. Valakav, don't think it's been so long that I would have forgotten you. What brings you do this neck of Huecomundo? Surely it isn't to protect those weaklings, is it? He said casually but forcefully. Valakav's face didn't change. Drindo, Drindo, Drindo. Surely it isn't too much to allow these kids to live? After all, there are plenty of kingdoms within Huecomundo, and you haven't expanded upon yours in years. Is it so hard just letting them be? He asked, trying to appeal to Drindo. Drindo walked closer, until the 2 Vasto Lorde were standing 5 feet from each other, staring each other down. Yes, it is Valakav. This fox hollow has wronged me in so many ways. For starters, he instigated a rebellion amongst my slaves by removing their medallions, which has already caused the deaths of many of my own men. He trailed off. Valakav wasn't fazed. Secondly, he killed my brother. He said lightly. Not to mention, he's read El Libro de Ciclos. He knows the weakness of my slave medallions and instigated this rebellion. In addition, he must know about the other things that Tarobik mentioned about in the book. Valakav, after getting over the initial shock that Naruto of All Hollows has read the legendary book that even he hadn't read, smiled mockingly afterwards at Drindo. So, that's what this is all about, he said. You aren't doing this because you want to avenge your brother or anything, you're doing this because you want to take advantage of the opportunity to snatch that legendary book away from a hollow much weaker than Tarobik. You were afraid to go get it before because you know Tarobik could have beaten you with all the knowledge he has. He turned back to look back at Naruto. Even with his knowledge of your weaknesses, Naruto lacks the power to be able to defeat him. The one-on-one fight you had with him speaks for itself. Though, I do wonder how he managed to defeat Tarobik. He added the last point as an afterthought. Drindo looked mutinous, though he didn't outright deny the accusation. Instead, he looked to left over towards Naruto's cave complex, no doubt thinking of the secret that lay within it. So what if that's the case? This fox doesn't deserve to know the secrets of that book if he's that weak. Since I'm Tarobik's only relative, that automatically means that the book belongs to me. To me. After I kill all of you, I'm going to claim my rightful property, he shouted, any aspect of control now completely gone. It looks like talking with you isn't going to work after all. I should have realized this in the beginning, he said, lowering himself into something similar to a shinobi's taijutsu stance, something a bipedal creature like him would find advantageous. Whatever. The sooner we get this over with the better, he said, holding his hand below the tubes to allow a couple more pellets to drop directly into its palm. Shall we? Valakav asked, as the bones around his mask glowed 6 separate colors, 7 if you count the one that was both black and white. His body hissed with pure energy, something that startled the unconscious and defeated hollows awake. Ugh, my head. Grimjow moaned, clutching 2 of his paws to his mask. He then noticed the other Vasto Lorde, but he was too injured and stunned by Ryatsu to move. Who's this guy? He asked to both his king and fellow general, who had also woken up. Ulquiorra seemed to genuinely not know about the mysterious Vasto Lorde, but Naruto was a different story. Valakav. He hissed, remembering Valakav's saving of him. Anyone else would have been grateful, but Naruto instead was confused and angry at being treated in such a way. Again, no less, considering how Valakav butted into his rampage on Konoha. Valakav walked forward some more to keep them out of harm's way. After that, he held his arms out horizontally, and his black and yellow eyes gained some strange circles around them. Ah, Los Ojos de Samsara. I remember it all too well, Valakav. Didn't you once say that they were the remnants of some power you had in life called the Rinnegan? Drindo said, catching a few more pellets that he had created. I see you remember well, Drindo. While it is true my hollow techniques have some resemblance to my old Dojutsu. Unfortunately, I lost the Rinnegan after I died, and with it I lost the ability to understand the nature of chakra. While I may have carried over some of the Rinnegan's abilities, the ability to understand the nature of Ryuryoku and the ability to use the 6 paths has disappeared. Ryuryoku is much more powerful than chakra, but it is almost ludicrously more complex to understand. There's no way I'd be able to understand it. He stopped walking. However, despite losing the ability to use the 6 paths, and the ability to understand the energy around us, there is one ability that Los Ojos de Samsara retained. It can manipulate spiritual wavelengths to a certain degree, allowing me to pinpoint and use 6 separate wavelengths of Ryuryoku that change the properties of it. And that ability can be called in some circles. He disappeared, his sonido being roughly the same speed as Drindo's. He was at Drindo's side instantly, to which Drindo reacted violently by throwing the pellets haphazardly at him. The field was lit up with a few small explosions again, but Valakav wasn't fazed at all. Element manipulation. He whispered, as he grabbed onto Drindo's shoulder and threw the other Vasto Lorde crashing into the ground. Valakav stared at him lightly, before stomping his foot down on Valakav's torso. Fuego ofensivo. He said, as flaming Ryatsu gushed from the appendage that he had on Drindo. However, the other Vasto Lorde took advantage of the time between when Valakav had taken weight off him, and he used Sonido to disappear and leviate it high in the air. The blaze that emitted from Valakav's foot spread over the dirt over a 30-feet radius like a wildfire. Drindo fired a Siro from his hand down at Valakav, which was charged with his explosive Ryatsu. Tierra defensivo. He said, letting his earthen Ryatsu flow into the dirt around, which almost immediately responded. Soon, there was almost like a small earthquake underneath their feet, until the dirt cracked, hardened, and formed a defensive sphere large enough to protect both him and the defeated hollows almost 100 feet away. The Siro impacted the hardened dirt sphere with an impressive amount of force, though the explosion was not enough to breach through the wall. The explosion was contained outside of the sphere, but its radius was greater than anything that Drindo had shown thus far. Valakav let the dirt wall fall as soon as it was safe, panting at the amount of Ryatsu he had to unleash to keep that thing intact. Drindo's explosions were impressive to say the least, though his real merit was when he used it in hand-to-hand combat. Drindo seemed to think like this as well, because as soon as Valakav dropped his guard, he was in close range, firing away with explosive punches that Valakav had to deftly avoid. When Drindo came in for an explosive left hook, Valakav knew he was in trouble. So, he did the only thing he could think of in such a small window of time. He matched the explosive punch with a punch of his own, coated in fire Ryatsu. In hindsight, that was probably a bad idea. The two volatile punches collided with each other, creating an explosive discharge that neither of them could control. It exploded in their faces, throwing both Vasto Lordes backwards and wounded both of them at about the same rate. Such a high-level, hollow battle, whispered Ulquiorra over to the side. Though, that really was an amateur mistake made by this Valakav. He's clearly not as skilled as Drindo in hand-to-hand combat. All three hollows seemed to think the same thing, as Valakav's success was what their lives depended upon. Drindo got to this feat and laughed, clearly amused at Valakav's failure despite him being injured as well. What's wrong, Valakav? Have the years made you rusty? You seem a lot weaker than when you were younger. He commented, as Valakav pulled himself to his feet. Relampago ofensivo. He whispered to himself, as he fired a weak but very quick bolt of lightning from his finger. It took him so little time to fire it that Drindo wasn't even able to react. It seared him right through the shoulder like a laser, crippling his left arm. Dreendo howled as another hold was drilled through his body, this time making his arm useless. That was a good move. He didn't have to waste any time for hand seals like he would have to while alive. That lightning bolt was so quick I don't think anyone could have seen it in time. And, by crippling Dreendo's arm, he just upped his chances in hand-to-hand combat, said Naruto begrudgingly, even though he didn't like to admit that Valakav was good in battle. He fired off another bolt, this time not even saying the name of attack, but the near-invisible bolt of lightning didn't even hit Dreendo, who by now had wizened up and was on the move. He did a feint attack like he was going to punch from afar with his good arm, but the last second he appeared once again at close range. He attempted an explosive uppercut to propel Valakav into the air, but the other Vasto Lorde wasn't about to fall for such a simple trick. He ducked his head to the left, avoiding the attack entirely. Dreendo tried to combo him with a few kicks, but he avoided as well. As he sprung back into position while Dreendo was recovering from his own attacks, and clapped his hands together while they glowed with red Ryatsu. This allowed a burst of fire to come exploding from them, hitting Dreendo at close range. The slave-holding king flew back, the flames scalding through his defense and damaging his skin. It seems like Dreendo doesn't have a tactical approach to just about anything. Valakav is definitely outsmarting him every step of the way. I'm surprising such a bumbling hollow became a Vasto Lorde. Ulquiorra added off to the sidelines. You dirty bastard. You haven't changed at all since the days we spent as Barragan's advisors. You still like to play cheap, no wonder you managed to climb the ranks in Las Noches. Dreendo growled, now steaming mad. Like that matters. Anyone who made it to our rank as advisor had to do their fair share of backstabbing in order to make it there. You were no different. I still remember you conspiring to overthrow Barragan himself when he didn't completely share all of your ideals. Valakav retaliated. I don't care about that anymore. Barragan may have been my hero when I was a young, stupid hollow, but nowadays I realize how much of a fool he is. He provides refuge to Bestis. I lead my afterlife in that kingdom underneath the ideal that Barragan would one day purge the kingdom of those hollows. But, no. They just kept continuing to grow every single year, and I couldn't take it anymore. I had no choice but to take down Barragan, because... He trailed off, before he gained the most bloodthirsty look of hatred that wasn't even reserved for Naruto. He's the one who kept that book out my reach for so long. A few hundred feet away from the site of the battle, Neutra twiddled his sharp fingers in the dirt, occasionally rising to take out an enemy hollow that attempted to attack him. His dumbass king had kicked him out of the way of that last attack, preventing him from the death he always yearned for. He supposed that wasn't right though. He wouldn't have perished with honor, dying on his feet in the best battle he had ever had. No, he would have died like a little screaming bitch who was just in the way and complaining about his king. That wasn't the right way to go. He grit his teeth, almost drawing blood inside his own mouth. What would become of his pride if he was going to get in the way all the time? Didn't they understand how much this hurt him? He heard some distinct sounds over across the battlefield, and saw Haribel tearing her way through Dreendo's forces. A woman. Didn't they understand how he couldn't stand having a woman be equal to him in battle? No, they didn't understand that at all. They never would, as long as they lived. He supposed he was kind of grateful for the promise of power and the chance to battle, but they didn't understand his inferiority complex. Years before the main storyline, Barragan Lizenbarn wasn't always the most powerful king in all of Huecomundo. There was once a time when he was just like an ordinary hollow, except with the strange desire to see Huecomundo change, and at the center he would rule it all. He wanted to be king of this godforsaken place, and finally instill some order into the world that knew nothing but violence and instinct. He had been at least somewhat successful thus far, having recently risen to Vasto Lorde after merely 20 years as a hollow. He had also gathered up a good number of powerful hollows who believed in his cause, even though it was nowhere near enough to begin a kingdom. He mirrored Naruto's path in just about everything, minus the pure sadism that formed Naruto's personality. He had even found himself a right-hand man in the form of Valakav, though more often than not he took on the role of an advisor. However, Baragon couldn't shake the feeling that he was somewhat out of place with the rest of them. Out of the 500 or so hollows who currently followed his lead, most if not all of them were either civilized, or afraid of retribution should their bloodthirsty nature ever come out in front of the others. Valakav, on the other hand, was the closest there was to a normal hollow. Borderline psychotic, the strong Ajuchas was only here because Baragon got to him early, and the fact that he was clever, and gave such good advice. Baragon doubted he could have gotten so far without him. The whole group seemed to be eking out sort of a nomadic lifestyle, until they could gather enough numbers to be able to form a permanent settlement. These were dark times, even for Hueco There was a disturbing lack of a central organization, such as a kingdom, which could bring control to Hueco even if it was only slight. Baragon was aware of an empire that spanned nearly all of Hueco and could probably even rival Soul Society in power, but it had collapsed several centuries ago due to a reason unknown to Baragon. However, he did know that one could find remnants of this once great kingdom in its capital, which was located near the ocean. And surprisingly enough, there were rumors that its emperor was still out there somewhere, biding his time. He turned back towards his future subjects. They seemed to be sitting stoically either in the tents they had managed to create or out in the open. Occasionally, one of the more restless hollows would resist the urge to eat. Baragon was still an idealistic young hollow. He wasn't stupid enough to believe that they could unite all hollows, given their nature, but he believed that a fair number of them cooperate with each other and only eat those outside of their kingdom. His attention was cut from the condition of his subjects over to an even younger Ajuchas that seemed to approaching him easily. His appearance wasn't flattering, being an ugly gray, and he seemed almost devilish with the way his mask was formed. Still, he had a cocky and hot-blooded expression on his face, coupled with no little amount of bloodlust. Baragon, he began, not even slightly respectful in the face of his leader. I believe we have stayed here long enough. The other hollows are aware of our presence, and have reacted accordingly to avoid us. Prey is becoming slim, and though you became a Vasto Lorde and no longer have the need to eat, the rest of us will eventually be affected. We will soon need to find new hunting grounds, he said. Baragon nodded, surprisingly understanding of their current predicament. He looked over the encampment again, and spotted that his newest recruits seemed to be faring the worst. They were a pair of young Ajuchas brothers who seemed to have become hollows together. The younger was definitely the more laid-back of the two, and only joined him for an easier chance to get food. The older, however, seemed to be slightly on the power-hungry side. They both seemed to have become Ajuchas only recently, and the older one seemed to be getting intoxicated by his own power, which was admittedly very high. There came a shriek from the middle of the encampment, as a particularly large Ajuchas rose to his feet, howling in what could only be hunger. Baragon grit his teeth. He knew it was only a matter of time before something like this happened. The Ajuchas howled violently, throwing its sinewy arms around and scattering the surprised hollows around him. I can't take this anymore. I need to eat, he roared, as he took a bite out of a normal hollow who was unfortunate enough not to get away. The other hollows gave him a wide berth as he chewed the remains enthusiastically. The Ajuchas hissed psychotically, the small meal doing next to nothing for his hunger and bloodlust. He stalked outwards, towards the two Ajuchas brothers, who were casually sitting there. The hollow roared again as he charged the two Ajuchas, and raised one of his limbs in preparation to strike the two smaller Ajuchas. One of the Ajuchas, humanoid and blood-red in color, rose from his seat with startling fluidity, and caught the Ajucha's limb in a surprising display of strength. The other Ajuchas reared back in shock, but not before his opponent's arm glowed with a Ryatsu that seemed as hot as the sun. The larger Ajuchas didn't have time to react as the clutched appendage exploded in a blaze of glory, now only a stump attached to the main body. Ag! You bastard, the Ajuchas roared before he collapsed to the ground. His future killer allowed a look of bloodlust to pass through his face, while his brother watched the fight stoically off to the side. Without saying a single word, the humanoid Ajuchas wrapped his hand around the downed Ajucha's throat, squeezing tightly while allowing the hot Ryatsu to glow vibrantly. Then, all of a sudden, he allowed it to explode, creating a fountain of blood and a now headless Ajuchas. The other hollows in the camp murmured to themselves, all the while backing themselves away from the battle's victor. He went back to join his stoic brother, but not before noticing that both Baragan and Valakav had their eyes on him. Baragan was watching him as stoically as his brother, while Valakav seemed to have a look of glee on his face, as if this was a hollow whom he could control. The two top hollows looked at each other in understanding, before Baragan gestured his advisor to follow. As they approached the two, the look of stoicism on both of their faces disappeared into a look of respect. They bowed deeply, each of them muttering, "Baragan Sama, Valakav Sama." Valakav snickered, but Baragan said nothing for a few seconds. "You two, what are your names?" he asked finally, his tone never betraying anything unpleasant, just a simple curiosity. The two weaker hollows in front of him answered immediately. "Dreamdo," said the older brother, while the younger one muttered, "Terobik." "Dreamdo and Terobik, eh? Those were some superb fighting skills you just displayed right there, Dreamdo. It would be perfect, because I'm feeling a little lack of authority in these hollows. The two of us can only handle so much, so I need some positions of power other than myself and Valakav," he explained to the disbelieving Ajuchas, who knew where this was going. "I think you two are perfect for the job." A stream of lightning connected with Dreamdo's arm, singing it somewhat seriously. He was just in time to stop one of Valakav's horns from impaling him, but couldn't stop the tricky and cunning lightning attack that followed. "What's wrong, Dreamdo? You never could keep up with me, even in your prime," while an advisor for Baragan, Valakav taunted, trying to get the words to sting close to home. Says the hollow who had everything taken away from him. "My kingdom is still intact, unlike yours, thanks to the stable influx of bestie slaves. But, you wouldn't know about it, would you, since you and that pathetic Baragan never supported the use of slavery?" Dreamdo retorted, creating a lance of explosive Ryatsu and launching it at Valakav. The Vasto Lorde avoided it easily, though the attack engulfed several fighting hollows where it fell a good distance away. He was about to follow up with an explosive punch, but Valakav beat him to it. "Agua defensivo," he muttered, throwing a not too impressive splash of water onto the battlefield. However, at the sight of it, Dreamdo ceased his attack. He knew what that was, the water that could nullify any type of energy attack, including his explosions. True enough, the water glowed a bright green, giving it an unnatural hue. The water covered the distance between the two combatants, and Dreamdo knew he couldn't touch it, lest he lose the ability to use his strongest attacks. He needed to act quickly, before Valakav followed up with his. The humanoid king noticed Valakav go into a stance he was all too familiar with, and panicked against his will. He used to Sonido to cross the gap of water without touching it, but it was too late. "Agua offensivo," Valakav said, raising his hands in the air as the water came to life in the form of large bubbles that levitated in the air. "Shit," Dreamdo said, as the bubbles morphed into little needles that were threatening to rain down upon him. He sonidoed into the air and darted away, but the water then morphed into a tentacle which traveled at great speeds towards him. Dreamdo attempted to buck it off of him, but the tentacle was too versatile and speedy even for him, and the strange greenish water wrapped itself around his left arm, which was the easiest place for it to capture. The water swung him around in the air for a while, before throwing and smashing him into the earth, before seeping in the arm. Dreamdo gasped as the water seeped into his arm. His left arm was now next to useless in the fight, as the seeping of the water negated his ability to use anything but physical attacks. Physically attacks seemed to be what Valakav was going for though, as he didn't give Dreamdo any time to recover before appearing in his face, and slamming his powerful fist into the face of the weakened Vasto Lorde. It would definitely leave a mark, but Dreamdo wasn't down for the count. He failed to notice the fox hollow that was getting to his feet after being knocked unconscious. "Now, make sure you two find something interesting down there. We don't want to return to Baragan empty-handed," called Valakav to the two hollows who were exploring a cave complex near the sea they had recently discovered. Despite being top advisors for Baragan's kingdom, they had been ordered to lead an expedition team to the Far East. Valakav, itching for adventure and a fight or two, wouldn't hear about being left behind. The other hollows around them gave grunts of agreement, prompting Drindo to lash out in annoyance, while Tarobik simply looked on ahead towards his goal. Figures that most of the hollows accompanying us would be animal hollows, he muttered to himself. He was definitely getting annoyed with them, after noticing that they seemed to be much rowdier than humanoid hollows. He had to train these assholes, for God's sake. He noticed a few grunts ahead of him. Tarobik seemed to have taken out a few enemy hollows. This proved that this cave complex was inhabited, but he doubted anything there would pose a real threat towards them. Yeah, we'll find something to bring back to Berrigan, so this expedition wasn't a giant waste of time for everyone, called back Drindo, not really caring if Valakav had heard him or not. The humanoid Ajuchas was getting a lot grumpier after many years in Berrigan's forces. He had joined for power, and was even awarded a high position in the kingdom that gave him importance over the other hollows. So, why the hell didn't he feel much stronger than the day he was recruited? It was because his king was always turning his attention to the weaker hollows instead of him. Where was the power that Berrigan had promised him all those years ago? It was given to the new hollows that were rapidly joining the kingdom, most of them animal hollows. He was cut from his thoughts by his brother, who told him that they should continue moving. His brother was an animal hollow too, he realized, taking the shape of large, gray ox. He had adjusted reasonably well to Las Noches, never demanding any power like he had, yet he still managed to grow stronger than him. "Yeah, I'm coming," he called unenthusiastically, the voice drowning out whatever Valakav had called back towards him. He didn't know whether Valakav was still talking after a while, because they had moved deeper into the cave so that all voices from the surface would be drowned out completely. Drindo was thoroughly surprised about this place, though he didn't let it show. It was Valakav's suggestion that they explore this place, probably just to make them do more work. The Blood-Red Hollow had simply expected an empty cave with a few hollow here and there, but the place actually seemed to be some remnant of an ancient hollow civilization. There were torches on the wall that lit the way, and occasionally they would run into a few wall paintings that seemed to tell some kind of story, though he couldn't figure out what. Tarobik wasn't paying any attention to the walls, though that was just like him to not really care about anything. He was being cautious enough to stay on his guard though, as they both knew an attack could come at any time. They descended down this long spiral staircase that seemed to be the main hub of the complex, until the two hollows came across this large, worn-out door. It seemed weathered with age, but the few ornate designs it had left on it seemed to indicate that it led to somewhere important. Tarobik clutched the handle carefully and pulled, allowing the door to creak open with a small degree of effort. He peered inside, before his eyes focused on something that apparently was of interest to him. "What is it? Do you see something, Tarobik?" Drindo asked, when he wasn't getting a response from his brother. The younger hollow turned back towards Drindo, his eyes fraught with confusion, but thankfully not worry. "Eh, book?" Tarobik said lightly, his voice just as confused as his eyes. Drindo raised an eyebrow at the odd proclamation. "A book? What's a book doing in a place like this?" he asked. "I don't know," said Tarobik as he swung the door open. "But whatever it is, it seems to be really important. I mean, just look at it." He pointed into the room, where Drindo saw the ornate, golden-bound book sitting on a crude pedestal of sorts, almost like it was a shrine. Drindo stepped into the room cautiously, subconsciously thinking that this was some kind of trap that would set off the moment he touched the thing. He vaguely noted a stone chair of sorts in the back of the humongous chamber, but it was unoccupied. He sauntered up to the book carefully, scrutinizing it before he came to the conclusion that it was safe to touch. The torches in the background shone on the book, giving it a sort of holy or unholy feel. After a tense few minutes, he reached out and grabbed the book, grimacing while thinking about the trap he set off. Tarobik, who was still outside the room, bunkered down and prepared for it as well. However, when the trap never came, Drindo was able to get a good look at what he had taken. It was lighter in his hands than he had expected, and as he flipped it over onto its front cover, he noticed that there was no title. Just a strange cross-like pattern that seemed too abundant all over the cover of the book, its spine included. He caressed the spine of the book lightly, the strange vibe he was getting from the tome intensifying. He was about to open it, but as he did he felt a strange chill creep down his spine, just like he was being watched by something. His brother seemed to be feeling it too, but it went beyond a simple hunch, as he saw a pair of mustard-yellow eyes peer at them from a small opening to the right of the throne. "Dreamdo, look! Enemy!" Tarobik shouted, pointing to the eyes that panned from Dreamdo over to Tarobik in the instant that he said that. Dreamdo dropped the book immediately, before falling into a fighting stance to meet the current threat. He noticed the eyes right before they disappeared, and a solemn figure walked casually out of the cave complex. Probably just a weak hollow looking for an easy meal, he thought to himself, before a crushing Ryatsu, even greater than Barragan's, both paralyzed him and his brother. The humanoid Ajuchas fell to his knees, breathing in heavily from the pure force that weighed down on them. The figure came into full sight, and what a sight it was! A chimera-like hollow, one that was clearly a Vasto Lorde, walked out of the small passageway, grinning at the downed hollow's. Dreamdo managed to raise his head barely, taking in the hollow who had the body of a lion and the mask of a snake, while two antlers protruded out of the reptilian mask. Its body was a deep yellow, going along with the lion theme its lower body was going for. It was strange, but Dreamdo thought he saw this particular hollow on some of the cave drawings on their way here. It was crude, yes, but there was no mistaking that body. Another strange thing was that he always seemed to be surrounded by a large key at his foot, while a tome was tucked underneath his arm. Well. It seems I have some rare visitors to my domain. The chimera spoke, its voice a mixture of the hissing of a snake and the growling of a lion. He released the pressure on the two weaker hollows, though they didn't dare attack him after that display of power. "It seems you're not completely stupid. Almost any other hollow would have attacked me right there," he mused, a sly grin coming onto his face as spotted the book at Dreamdo's feet. "But, it seems you've taken an interest in El Libro de Ciclos. I don't take very kindly to those who would steal my belongings, especially since that book contains all of my records from when I ruled," he commented, his voice raising a bit near the end. "Wait, so you wrote it?" wheezed Tarobik as he climbed to his feet, still looking worse for wear. The chimera's attitude seemed to dampen at that, and he sat on his throne, slouching a little. "Yeah, it's my compilation of all the discoveries I made during my time as ruler. Not to toot my own horn or anything, but I made quite a few discoveries during that time." He trailed off, and no one said anything for a little while. "But it doesn't matter. None of it. I lost it all when I overestimated my own abilities, and attacked the Soul Society. My kingdom, and all of the hollows in it." Dreamdo's eyes widened significantly. "Wait, kingdom? Your kingdom? Then that means, the rumors were..." He trailed off. "Allow me to introduce myself. The name's Reporo, ruler of the ancient kingdom you've probably heard so much about. Indeed, I once ruled the vast majority of Huecomundo, and I even had the power to rival Soul Society, or so I thought," he explained. "At the height of my power, I discovered the secret to Arancarisation, and with that, I was unstoppable. Around 500 years ago, I attacked Soul Society in search of another thing that I made a discovery about. The attack went somewhat successful. With my forces, we managed to kill 9 of the 13 captains, and eliminate over half of the total Shinigami. I even made it to the realm of the Spirit King, in order to consolidate my victory. But the Royal Guard, coupled with Yamamoto Genryosai, was too much for me. Our forces were repelled, and the objective I searched for fell out of my grasp. I just barely managed to escape back into Huecomundo, but my beautiful kingdom was in tatters. I have lived in regret ever since." Reporo finished. Dreamdo suspected that the old Vasto Lorde simply wanted someone to talk to after all these years. "In hindsight, I have nothing left. Everything in that book I already know. So, thinking about it, you can have it. These last 500 years have humbled me completely, and if someone can find a use for my discoveries, go for it. The secret of Arancarisation is in there, You'll be able to do great things if you become an Arrancar. Drindo stared numbly at the book, never having interrupted during Raporo's tale. He was just gonna give it to us. According to him, the secrets behind this book were incredible. Hell, it would be very valuable if the only thing contained here was the secret to Arrancarization. Please, leave me be. Take it and go. Raporo said solemnly, clearly taken back by all the memories he just recounted to them. Drindo didn't say a word, deciding to leave the old hollow to wallow in his misery. He picked up the tome, apparently the last vestige of the greatest hollow in existence, and left, leaving the old hollow down there alone. As they headed back to the surface, their eyes were glued to the text in awe at what Raporo had discovered. The secret to Arrancarization was the main topic of the book, and already Drindo's mind was swimming with the amount of power he could obtain. So much more than what he could have in Barragan's kingdom. Tarobik seemed to have the same idea, at least somewhat, and it was rare to take this kind of interest in power. As they neared the exit, they could see one of their hollows looking back at them before he scampered off, no doubt to tell Valakaf that they have returned. So, you have returned. I think it's about time we head back to Las Noches. We've been out here long enough, and Barragan can't go more than 2 years without us. Why don't you tell me your findings as we head back, said Valakaf. Drindo and Tarobik looked at each other, before Drindo stepped up with arms around the book. No, I don't think we'll be going back. Drindo smiled evilly. I have a book holding the most powerful secrets to Huecomundo in my hands. Why would I want to go back to some ass-backwards kingdom that hasn't made any advancements in years? I think it's time that Huecomundo learned of the name Drindo. Naruto awoke with a splitting headache, but that wasn't important right now. What was important was that bastard Drindo was still out there and kicking, and that Valakaf had shamed him immensely. He launched a Zero out of frustration, which clipped 2 more fighting hollows and alerted both Drindo and Tarobik of his presence. Oh, so that kid's awake again, muttered Drindo, more out of frustration than amusement. Valakaf seemed somewhat perturbed by it as well, as he knew Naruto would be a handful if he were awake. Indio, he roared, rushing into battle again, uncaring of his downed comrades. He only had one goal right about now, and that was eliminate the enemy in front of him. He attempted to tear into Drindo as fast as he could, scratched, tearing, biting, and firing Zeros at the Vasto Lorde. But Drindo took them all with fluid movement, proving how feeble such attacks were to him. But the arrogant Vasto Lorde missed one thing. Fuego ofensivo, roared Valakaf, as he slammed his fiery fist into Drindo's torso, which propelled the king forward, allowing Naruto to strike him with his hind leg up into the air. The fox sonidoed up there, raising both claws and slashing across his torso with them, creating deep gashes that formed an X pattern across his torso. The king fell to earth, but Valakaf knew he wouldn't be defeated by that, so he prepared for it. Agua ofensivo, he cried, spreading a pool of the deadly water across the ground. Naruto caught the hint of where Drindo was supposed to land, and before the king himself could recover, he was kicked downwards in the pool of water. The water almost scalded Drindo's skin, but it began to yet again seep into it, stripping him of all his explosive powers. For a time, Drindo and Tarobik ruled together, forming a surprisingly stable kingdom on the island where Drindo's current kingdom lay. Both of the brothers managed to rise to Vasto Lorde using the book's help. But, as time went on, Drindo started to get greedy trying to figure out the secret of Arrancarization, while Tarobik began to tire of being in his brother's shadow as supreme leader of the kingdom, and his apparent racism. Drindo, is this really necessary? Asked Tarobik, seeing the numerous slave hollows digging a deep burrow beneath the island. Being an animal hollow himself, he was very uncomfortable with his brother's methods, but never raised this concern to him personally. You know it is, Tarobik. The book says that in order to become Arrancar, one must find of the 86 bolas de evolution that have been here since the beginning of Huecomundo. These orbs of light forcibly remove the boundaries between Shinigami and Hollow, allowing the Hollow to become Arrancar. While some Hollows have stumbled across the bolas and become Arrancar unintentionally, This will be the first mass Arancarization since the great times of the ancient kingdom. It is completely and utterly necessary. And the diagram of Huecomundo left in the book detailed the locations of 85 of the 86 bolas. And the closest one is underneath our very island, which is why I am using the animal slaves to dig it up. But, Cherubic, I am the older brother, and more powerful than you are. You may be second in command, but I can still turn you into an animal slave like the bestie that you are. So I suggest you stop arguing with me before I lose my temper. He said curtly. Cherubic glared at him intensely, but Drindo paid him no mind. The younger brother of the two swept back into the castle, his mind made up on something he had to do. Later that night, the shadow of an ox crept through the castle's walls into a small chamber, where El Libro de Ciclos set itself upon a pedestal, much like the time when Reporo was the holder of the book. No security system as usual. It's a wonder how my stupid brother hasn't been assassinated yet, he muttered to himself, grabbing the book easily and without any traps being set off. He was aware that Drindo would come after him, so he took the next half hour to write his brother's weaknesses in the side margins for future reference. He crept out of the room and into the main hallway again, watching himself for guards who might answer to Drindo instead of him. He almost sighed in relief before a low voice resounded next to him, its tone filled with betrayed hatred. "Going somewhere, Cherubic?" it asked. Cherubic's breath caught in his throat, as he turned and laid eyes upon his brother, who was surrounded by a platoon of Ajicha's guards and glaring at him fiercely. Cherubic backed up and held the book protectively. Drindo waved his hands, sending his personal set of guards out at his traitorous brother. Cherubic looked around for an escape before the whole kingdom would be after him, but he had to cut off his thinking to hit the first guard in the jugular. There, he thought, seeing a glass window on the other side. He propelled himself past the line of guards, but he was stopped at the window by his similarly skilled brother, who tried to cut him off with an explosive punch. He parried the thing easily, before throwing himself through the window and levitating in midair. He gallivanted about the castle, looking for the nearest Leviathan hollow so he could escape towards the mainland. The cave complex where Reporo was sounded like a good place to hole up and prepare himself for Drindo's retribution. Don't let him escape. He has El Libro de Ciclos. We need that book to tell us exactly how to active the Bolas de Evolution. We won't be able to evolve our forces without it. Drindo roared, sometimes even forcing his guards to get a move on. Drindo would attempt to capture his brother 16 times after Cherubic holed himself into the cave complex. Each time would be a failure, and Drindo would gain a deeper hatred for animal hollows. He also never saw El Libro de Ciclos ever again. Shit, that was a close one. I'm glad that didn't. Drindo cut himself off as he realized finally just where he was sitting. In a pool of Valikav's dangerous water, which had all soaked into his skin. No, 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 he screamed in his mind, baking away from the pool of water and back into the dirt again. A bead of sweat rolled down his face, and that was when he noticed both Naruto and Valikav looking at him, evil grins on their face. Valikav stepped forward, prompting Drindo to step away, his true cowardly colors revealed now that he was powerless. The former Rikudu Sanin punched, causing a sickening crack to appear on Drindo's mask. He flew back several yards from the punch, landing in a heap of ways. It was Naruto's turn now, and the fox appeared in his face in an instant, again not giving Drindo any time to recover. Normally, an Ajuchas like him wouldn't be a problem, even in his weakened state, but he was so worn out from fighting that even Naruto could lay a beat down on him. The fox hollow slashed him across the eyes, causing a cry of pain and a spasm of pleasure from Naruto. He clutched his mask, desperately trying to keep the blood out of his eyes, but to no avail. He was blinded, and with no way to stop it. Although he couldn't see anymore, he definitely felt his airways being constricted as Naruto hoisted up the feeble king easily using only his front right paw. Drindo coughed up blood violently, and gurgled loudly. The rest of the onlookers noticed the commotion over there, and slowly but surely, the fighting died down at the mesmerizing display of Drindo about to be defeated. Drindo's vassals had a look of fear on their face for the condition of their king, while those on Naruto's side were simply confused about what was happening. "Wait, we can talk this over, Naruto. I swear I'll leave you alone. I'll even give you my minions as slaves. Just please, let me live. I don't need that book anymore. In fact, you can have it. Just..." He gurgled out his ramblings, though Naruto wasn't paying attention to any of it. "No," he whispered, as the younger Hollow tightened his grip around the Vasto Lorde's neck, his choking get more intense. He passed through muscle and sinew easily, and Drindo felt it as his bones began to crack. "Blia!" he moaned, as his vision began to get very blurry. Naruto gave him one last shit-eating grin, but wasn't even gracing his presence or status with any kind of words. Squelch! The hollows around them gasped in surprise, as Naruto's paws didn't just go through bone, but obliterated Drindo's neck completely. It was an explosion of blood and muscle tissue that scattered in a nearly 10-foot radius around the pair. Naruto became drenched in the life fluid, but with his red coat of fur and armor, it wasn't that noticeable. Drindo's head fell to the ground with a thump, lifeless eyes still screaming in agony. Naruto grinned at it, and picked up the head and placed the head next to the body. He noticed Valakav walking up to him, but he was still reveling in his victory to attack the other Vasto Lorde for shaming him. "About time someone took care of that asshole," he muttered, as Naruto smirked at the body. His ears perked up at the low scream, and noticed that Drindo's troops were scattering in every direction, desperate to get away now that their king had fallen. "Cowards, every last one of them," he muttered, tripping one running in his direction before tearing his throat out. "They're just like humans," he said distastefully. "Well, they are humanoid," pointed out Valakav. Naruto hummed to himself. "Yeah, I guess it's a given that they're very similar to humans. I think I've decided that I don't need any hollows like them fighting for me." "Well, do what you want then. I've had a bone to pick with Drindo for quite a long time, and I've fulfilled my desire to bring him down. The rest is all you, so I think I'm gonna wander around Huecamundo some more," he said before stopping. "Oh, by the way, since it is your kill, that means that the body is all yours. This would be your second Vasto Lorde meal, would it not?" said Drindo, as the last winds just came out as a whisper on the wind as he sonitoed away from the battlefield. Naruto didn't even notice him leave. "Oh man, this is gonna be good," said Naruto with glee, as he stared down at the carcass of Drindo. He peered over to the side, and noticed that any of his generals hadn't woken up yet. Oh well, he could tend to them later. Drindo's troops had shuffled out completely, but Naruto swore he would kill them all later. Right now, all there was around were the hollows in his kingdom, still staring at him in disbelief that he had taken out a Vasto Lorde of all hollows. They seemed to be waiting for his next move. Naruto didn't need any more prodding. He ate the head first, it being the most delectable to him, before he began tearing and chewing into the body. The other hollows looked at him in envy, but he didn't pay them any mind. He was so engrossed on the great flavor. He tore out a rib of meat and ate it, savoring every last bite, before a sudden feeling came over him. The bone clattered to the ground, it and the leftovers of Drindo being forgotten as Naruto began to spasm. It felt like he was going puke, but he simply fell to his knees and began breathing heavily. His mustard-yellow eyes rolled to the back of his head behind his mask, and little wisps of orange Ryatsu began oozing off the young hollow. He gave a hideous roar, even more primal than his normal ones, towards the heavens, scattering all the hollows in the vicinity. And then, what was just a little Ryatsu became a full-on torrent of it, forcing the weaker hollows to their knees to begin breathing heavily along with their king. The orange Ryatsu concentrated where Naruto, becoming a tornado of the stuff with a torrent of it blowing outwards towards the mass of hollows. In the center, a figure glowing an even brighter orange took on a remarkable resemblance. The confused hollows stared at the spectacle in pure awe, not realizing what was happening until they finally came to their senses. And when they realized what was happening, they all dropped to their knees and bowed. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you enjoyed this what if and want to see next part of it, comment down below and let me know. Also share this video with your friends. See you in the next video. Peace.